but this is for people who are not totally convinced, who might have thought about turning me off and listening to something else. For people who are skeptical about museums, we got something for you.
That's right. We have some incredible things coming your way today in this episode. That is Bob Eckstein. He's an award-winning illustrator, writer, and cartoonist for The New Yorker, The New York Times, Reader's Digest, among others. And you almost get a double podcast here in this episode. We are going to get Bob's list, which is the best of the best of the best list of museums. You're going to hear the top 9 museums in the U.S., pulled from his book, Footnotes from the Most Fascinating Museums. We talk about his experience putting this book together and what it was like to hit the road and visit some of these places. And this is quite an eclectic list, so I know you're going to get plenty of ideas to add to your bucket list. And on the other side, we go deep on creativity. It was incredible to hear Bob's story, how he really came from pretty much nothing. He came from a poor family, never finished high school, yet found a way to pursue the arts and earn a living from his creativity. We talk about his journey, and he gives a load of practical advice on creativity, choosing projects, how to stick with something, his paper airplanes approach, how he curates ideas, practical mindset strategies to cultivate your creativity like this.
Because anxiety is not your friend when you're trying to be creative. You have to be in a playful mood. You have to be in a joyous sort of state of mind to come up with happy accidents of ideas and solutions to things that you're trying to do.
And loads more, and it's all happening in this show right now. You're not going to want to miss it. So buckle up, strap in. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Hey, it's Jason here with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show, my friend. Thanks for hanging out, letting me bring a little travel into your ears today. This is the show to help you travel the world on your terms, to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. And what traveler doesn't love a good museum visit? It's what we're talking about today, among many other topics, with the wonderful Bob Eckstein. You can learn more about his work over at bobeckstein.com. And he is quite a creative force, and I loved getting to dive deep with him on that topic. I think there's a lot of value across the entire episode, so I hope you enjoy it. Stick around on the back end. Just a couple quick things I wanted to mention. First of all, I'm going to leave you with a challenge that I think is a fun one you'll enjoy. I'm going to leave you with a funny quote and an important reminder before I send you off on your day. So let's not dilly-dally, shall we? Please enjoy this episode. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the other side. Cheers. Bob Eckstein, welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend. Great to have you here.
Thanks so much, Jason.
You are based in New York City, correct?
Well, that's true, but right now I'm coming to you from eastern Pennsylvania in the woods.
Okay. I mean, well, I'm a Pennsylvania boy. You know, I'm from PA. Whereabouts are you?
I'm at Lake Wallenpopack, and more specifically, I'm coming from a little attic in my house. I refitted into the captain's quarters, which has actually been selected in magazines as like one of the coolest offices. Actually, Macworld picked it one of the top 10 offices in the world, and other places have featured it as well. It's been on TV and on magazines because I refitted this to get into the spirit of writing about being on a ship in 1850. So I redid the room to look like an old ship.
Really? That's dedication to the craft, Bob.
It's actually procrastination.
Yeah, it's procrastination to the craft. I like that. You know, it's a nice spin on it. I don't know if we can find a picture of that, but we can try to post it up in the show notes so people can see. That's
absolutely.
I know you've brought a list here, I believe, of some of the best museums from your book, which you guys sent me. And I really appreciate footnotes from the most fascinating museum stories and memorable moments from people who love museums. And if you're a traveler listening to this, I mean, who doesn't love a good museum day? So I thought this would be a great opportunity. We're going to dive into all things book related and museums and everything like that. But since you brought up this unique office and I see some like crazy lights going on in the background and stuff, this is making me think of a thread that goes through your work, which is basically you chasing your curiosity, it seems. And some of these things that you've created, it would seem like on the surface, well, is there like a market potential for a book on, a illustrated history of snowmen, or a book about, cat names and things like this? Yet you've built this incredible career around what I believe is a big thread is just kind of like following your curiosity. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah. I mean, I was a big Sherlock Holmes fan. So I always wanted to like solve mysteries, but I didn't want to do like a life mystery as much as sort of a crime. But I wanted to do something like a little question, like who made the first snowman? Or who made the first joke? So it could be something like that. And so that sort of sprung on that. And the other thing is I like to try to raise awareness for things that could use a little push. So for one case, I did a book called Footnotes from the World's Greatest Bookstores. And that was to help bookstores raise awareness. And then I was able to paint these different bookstores, and that was a lot of fun. And also a way of me thanking them for them helping me.
Is that an important part of project selection for you? Like when you're deciding on a creative project, because I imagine you have a billion ideas, you could go a million different directions. It starts selfishly, because the first criteria is what's going to be the most amount of fun. So as much as I want to say, it's about this and that, it's a few factors, but basically it starts with what would be the most fun way to spend the next year or two. So the last year or two I spent going to museums. It was like a dream job. Right. Well, it's a lot of our decisions are based on the questions we ask ourselves. For anybody listening, I mean, if you're kind of struggling to choose between projects like I am, insert me here right now, it's a great question to ask yourself. What's going to be the most fun? People got to make a living. They got to pay bills. Like, how do you sort of marry that with, maybe you're at this point in your career where you can kind of do these things, but I know there's been other points in your career where it was a more difficult to choose a project like that just because it's going to be fun. Like, how do you kind of reconcile those two things as a writer, as a cartoonist, as a creative being?
Well, that's a good question. It's interesting. And I talk about this with my students. I teach, or I used to teach at NYU, which I took off a sabbatical from that. But I was teaching at a few different places. And I'm actually supposed to be teaching, I think, in South Korea at the end of the year. I will be teaching there either remotely or in person. And that will be the biggest trip I ever made, talk about travel. But asking the question about what you should be doing is, I kind of take on the approach that you make these paper airplanes, and these projects are paper airplanes, and you chuck them out the window and you see which one sticks. We live in a time, I think, where you can't rely on anything being a sure thing. I hear people always tell me, I'm going to write a memoir and that's going to be my retirement. I'm going to make so much money from the advance, or I'm going to be writing this book, and Jason, it's going to become a movie. It's going to do so well. It's going to do so great. Yeah. And I am working on a script right now for a movie for my History of the Snowman book. But I'm smart enough to know that there's no way I could be sure that it's going to be made into a movie. First of all, most scripts, 9 out of 10 scripts don't cross the finish line. But I'm going to try. I'm making that paper airplane and I'm tossing it out the window. And then I'm going to do all these other things. And I'm going to see which one kind of sticks, which one kind of captures the imagination of the readership out there, which one kind of has legs on its own. So I'm always doing these different books, and I'm doing like 3 books right now. I don't know which one's going to really take off. Maybe one of them could, but I have to wait and see. I have to see which one is going to get that traction. So you want to make all the projects fun, because they're all going to take a lot of time. And you don't want to feel like you're chasing something for the money's sake. That's a mistake. I was just listening to another podcast. I was listening to your podcast recently, of course, just to get your voice and get a sense of your feel, which was really good. And I'm really enjoying your shows, by the way. I listened to a lot of podcasts, and one of them had on Jerry Seinfeld. He was on a podcast called Blocks, and he was saying that David Letterman told him that on any project, don't be afraid to fail. Embrace that. And if you do fail, that's fine. It's not about that. I mean, you want to fail because, you try to do anything you want to do. If you fail, it happens. But don't try to placate to what you're trying to do. Do what you love doing and just see what happens.
If you're asking yourself, going back to your original question, is this going to be a fun way to spend a year or two? What's the downside there? There can be a lot of different things depending on your scenario. But if you're looking at it, you say, okay, well, maybe I had fun and I learned a lot.
There's no waste of time. There's something to learn or there's something to grow from that. In the same way, I hear people say, I broke up with someone and, it was a waste of time. It wasn't a waste of time. There was a point that was right for you, or you grew during that period with that person. And that's just simply a part to another part. You move on. So a project might fail, but it might lead to something else that's successful and then becomes more fulfilling. And that's the key word, is fulfilling, instead of saying, was it financially worth it? Because if you chase that way, you're going to be kind of disappointed, because when you reach some success just monetarily, you realize it's a lot more than that.
Because projects do come with a lot of struggles, and there may be points, or there's almost inevitably a point where it's not fulfilling, say, in that moment, whether that point lasts, a few days or a few weeks, or, there's maybe some struggle involved. Maybe you're not getting the cooperation, or whatever the case is. How do you kind of push through those parts of the project? Is it just the bigger picture of like, I know this project is fulfilling, it's just right now it's a struggle, but are you just kind of embracing that? Like, how do you kind of approach those?
A lot of times it's the excitement of just knowing that you get inspired. Each case is different. So I can't say there's a general rule, but like in the case of the museum book, I was going into all these different museums, seeing great artwork. So I wanted to go home and create my own artwork, and I was inspired by what I just saw. So there's that. In the case of the snowman, I was trying to solve this mystery, and I had a dream team of experts helping me. I had professors and art historians, and they all were doing their own research and coming back to me with results. So there was an excitement there about solving this question, and it was piecing together this puzzle that was kind of exciting. But there's always going to be times where there's going to be lulls in a project, and when you say, can I get past this? The first thing I think of when you said that was Substack. Everyone now is excited about doing newsletters. Everyone's got a new newsletter, and everyone kind of quits after a certain point because they don't have followers. And that's a perfect example of a challenge where you feel like you have to get past that point in which you have no followers, you're starting out, and you have to just be patient until your newsletter takes off. And then it gets better and you get past that. But initially, it can be that challenge of saying, is it worth doing? And I think every artist and every, all different disciplines of work go through that period in which there's a feeling of like, is this going down the right road? That it's like that moment from that movie. Did you ever see the movie African Queen with Humphrey Bogart?
No, I don't think so.
In this movie, he's on this little ship and they're stuck in the woods, in the weeds, and they can't go anywhere. But they don't realize that 100 feet away, there's wide open water of the ocean. And I think we all go through that in our career where we're stuck somewhere and we don't know where that point is, where we have open water ahead of us. So the best thing to do is just to convince yourself to just work through it and see what happens. I mean, that's part of the fun. If you could turn it around and find the fun in this and say, it's a challenge. If I could get through, and then I'll have this project, and then I'll have this book, or whatever you're doing. I don't know what project it is, but I'd be very curious to hear what choices you're making, because I find this exciting. And what you want to do is mentally turn it around to say, I got to see it through. I got to take that risk. You want to take that risk because that's what life is all about, is taking that risk and saying, what if?
So going in kind of with the mindset of there's going to be these inevitable speed bumps, and let me reframe this. If I'm having a negative attitude towards it, let me reframe it as, okay, here's the challenge. Let's push through. Like it's here now. It's happening, which of course, when it's happening, it can be sucky, but that's that's where all the growth occurs, right? Like, not to get too cliche about it, but
no, it's, and I think everyone goes through this. And that's a big point of all of this, is knowing that people all go through this struggle, whether it's the Beatles being rejected first by 19 record companies before they have one company. And, I have people telling me, they said, well, I got rejected by 2 publishers. I said, well, you think you're better than the Beatles? I mean, everyone has got this struggle. We only hear the success stories. You did an intro with me, so people are thinking, oh, he had it easy. I had a New York Times bestseller or something. But what you didn't say in the intro is how many times I failed, how many projects that didn't take off, and every person goes through that. And knowing that, I think, helps. I just wrote this piece for a magazine called Writer's Digest. I'm a writer for this magazine. And we talk about writing and stuff. And in this issue, I was talking about imposter syndrome, which is that everyone has these doubts in their head about, could they do it? Are they really a writer? Are they really a broadcaster? Are they really an athlete? So we all have those doubts, and you have to tackle them and put them aside and understand that it's natural and it's a part of the creative process that you come across these challenges where you say, I don't know if I could go through this. Is it worth it? But that's natural. Mozart went through this.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Are you better than you think you're better than the Beatles? That's that one's sticking in my head. Next time I come up against a wall. I appreciated that on your website, because you were talking about, you had some bio sections. You were talking about teaching school at the visual arts and writing humor columns for the Village Voice and Time Out. And you just say quickly, like, I'm just sharing the highlights here. And in summary, it all sounds easy, but there was a lot of struggle and many false starts. I appreciate that you said that, because it was just like a quick aside, but at the same time, you can't gloss over that period of growth like that. How much does that period for you inform your work now?
Well, you try to go forward, and I tell this to people who get frustrated, to just look at it like a railroad track, and you're putting down one railroad tie in front of you, and you try not to look back and say, what could have been, what I should have done differently. Instead, you just let it subconsciously build as part of your tool set, your skill set that you're collecting. But I don't reflect back and say, okay, consciously say, what did I learn from this? I just really blundered. I tried to build my own car and the car can't start. I'm not going to keep on dwelling on this.
Yet, Bob. Can't start yet.
Yeah. I keep on thinking back of relationships, because I was reading this morning, like Huffington Post all talks about divorce and things like that. But there's a lot of metaphors there too. And people say, what did I learn from my last relationship, or something like that? Well, you can drive yourself crazy if you keep going backwards and keep on saying, why did I go this path? Why did I get involved with this person? I think instead, you just got to say that some way or another, it's going to be part of your growth, and you're just going to keep going forward, because you could sap all your energy if you keep on going and reflecting back. I know a lot of people like to say, they do that. There's people who go into therapy and they rehash every trauma they had in their childhood. And of course, that works for a lot of people. And I know that you're also very aware of it being Mental Health Month, right? And you're doing that. But I also feel like sometimes if you kind of live in the past, that can be a weight. And sometimes it's very freeing to say you're going to move forward. Sometimes that freedom comes in the form of throwing out that manuscript in the fireplace or destroying a project that you feel like it's just weighting you down. There's nothing wrong with making mistakes and letting it be like just a springboard to doing something else. I know there's some people who've been working on the same project forever and ever for decades. And, that could be something that's debilitating. Instead, I suggest you do multiple projects. I mentioned before I'm doing like 3 books. Well, that's my way of just sort of putting more chips on the table and sort of hedging my bets. So I'm not putting all my eggs in one basket. There could be a lot of pressure doing that by doing everything into one thing. And then that if that fails, you've got nothing. So I try to keep that in mind, that you try to spread it out a little bit and lessen the anxiety, because anxiety is not your friend when you're trying to be creative. You have to be in a playful mood. You have to be in a joyous sort of state of mind to come up with happy accidents of ideas and solutions to things that you're trying to do. If you're constantly thinking, oh my God, I got a deadline on Monday. There's nothing else going on in my life but this one thing. And if I screw this up, it's all over. Well, you're not going to come up with the best ideas under that pressure. No one could.
There's stuff going on in life all the time, right? So it can be hard to divvy that out. Well, I mean, so on using the paper airplanes idea you mentioned, that's kind of my approach right now. At least it has been for the last year or so, is like, let me just kind of try to plant these little seeds and see which ones sprout. Same kind of idea. But my struggle is, and maybe some people listening can relate to this, and that's why I want to get some practical advice from you, because it seems like, even though you have these multiple airplanes in the air, that you're prolific and you see them all to a safe landing somehow and get them out to the world. But I find that when I am working on one thing, it's like I might get momentum, but then I switch to the other thing, and then this thing interrupts sort of the flow of that. And then 2 weeks goes by and I haven't worked on this thing. And it's like hard to juggle all that. What is your advice for managing projects in that way?
Well, first of all, it's natural what you're describing. You shouldn't be so hard on yourself. You should also realize you're human and even reward yourself. When you're doing those projects, you're your own boss. What you should do is you should reward when you do reach a goal, because you're not working at a regular job where you're getting those incentives normally. Let's say if you worked in an office and you reach a certain quota, the boss might give you some kind of incentive and reward. Well, doing your own projects, you deserve the same thing as well. You have to tell yourself that if you do complete this one goal within a project, that you deserve to take a break and go for a walk or a meal that's special or something to say, that's my way of saying that I've accomplished something. Instead of waiting to say, I'm going to give myself a reward when this becomes an Oscar-winning movie or when it becomes a #1 bestseller. I mean, that's another way of adding pressure to yourself and not understanding that you did accomplish something and you deserve to say that this was something that I should be congratulated for. So I would take it in baby steps and small steps, again, with the metaphor of a railroad track, of one railroad tie in front of you, instead of looking at the horizon way in the distance and saying, that's where I got to reach. Because if you do that, it's too daunting. When you said, you put off doing the project and you didn't finish it on something, that's the pressure, the anxiety of saying, I want to finish this whole project, instead of saying that each day you're going to take a step toward that goal of finishing it. Because when you see the whole big picture, it's too big. And that's why, Jerry Seinfeld was talking about embracing being able to fail. Do something you love doing, failing at that, instead of doing something that you don't like doing. It's better that you fail at something you love doing. So as long as you love doing it, enjoy the process and just keep moving in a slow way. And taking breaks from it, that's okay. Your mind's still working. You're still working on it in your sleep and your subconscious, and you're letting yourself percolate, and you're letting ideas marinate, and you're also letting sometimes the voices in your head come through. An example of that is, why is it that we all get our best ideas when we're taking a shower or in the bathroom? And that's because we've turned off our iPhones and we have all these distractions pulled away. And you're finally listening to some of the ideas that are percolating in your idea, in your head, that actually have been moving along as you're doing other things, whether it's other projects or it's whether you're dealing with you're with your family or whatever it is. Your mind is working. It's constantly doing things. And that's why coming back to a project in a couple of weeks could actually be beneficial.
That's great advice. Thank you. And I need to hear that right now. Maybe some other people listening need to hear it as well. Were your parents supportive of the career in the arts? Like sometimes, for better or worse, it seems like that might be the exception rather than the norm for a lot of people pursuing creative work, like becoming a cartoonist or writer or some of these other professions. What was the case for you?
I think this is helpful to hear for listeners. It'll be encouraging to hear that I grew up pretty poor. I grew up in the projects in the South Bronx in a very bad neighborhood. My dad was a bus driver. They knew nothing about the arts. I was not really exposed to any of this growing up. I didn't finish high school. And I started sneaking into college. I knew I wanted to go to college. And I would just go into class. And what I learned was that they don't take attendance for people who are not supposed to be there. You could just actually walk into a class and they wouldn't know that you're not supposed to be there in college. So eventually I went to college because I was able to get letters of recommendations from teachers explaining to them that I had been taking their classes and I was doing well. But I came from nothing in the way of momentum. I had zero momentum. I had no money and I had nobody telling me, oh, you're talented in writing or you're funny, you should do this. I even tried to convince my family I was funny at the dinner table. That was my stage. I was my open mic. And they were like the toughest audience. They really,
hardcore New Yorkers, always the toughest audience, right?
Yeah. And I know going to like about a half a dozen bar mitzvahs in the last few years, you go there and you hear the children always being told they could do anything. Everyone's told you could be anything, you could dream anything. I grew up in a time way back, I'm much older than I look. I grew up in a time when my class, there wasn't history class, it was current events. I was told back then, you're not going to amount to anything. So you were always fighting this sort of, I don't know what I want to call it. I don't want to be so harsh, but I certainly wouldn't call it encouragement. So you had to fight through that. And it was, there was this sort of motto, I had a creed, which was the grass is always greener when bursting through cement. And that was the sort of motivation that I could, I was going to try to burst through this cement. Somehow or another, I was going to be creative, despite what I felt like was against the odds.
And so was that all about your inner dialogue, just kind of like to come up from that and just keep pushing towards a career in the arts? Was that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
just kind of like attitude, like I'm going to do this. And
yeah, it was a competitiveness too. I was pretty hungry by the time I got into college. I was really feeling like I want to prove myself. I was going to try to make myself into something. And I was just going to keep going forward. And it was blind, stupidity that I didn't realize that I maybe didn't belong, but I pushed through and I kept on learning and I got better. I mean, I started out, as nothing, but I didn't realize how bad I was. And that was helpful to just keep on plowing through. And I say plowing through, I easily did thousands of pieces of artwork in the first 10 years I was working. And that just gets you better and better. It's like cartoons. I do cartoons for the New Yorker. And there was a stretch in which I was doing like 10 cartoons a week. And a really good cartoonist named Jack Ziegler told me, you won't know anything until you've accomplished 1,000 cartoons. And then you'll get it. And now there's been other types of stories like this with Malcolm Gladwell and other people who say, you have to do it like 1,000 times before you accomplish that task. Now, there's no set rule to it, of course, but that's an example of how you have to put in the work, and you have to, you get through it. I name dropped Jerry Seinfeld. He also said in the podcast how like 9 out of 10 jokes that he is not funny. They don't work. So even for the people who are really masters of their craft, they have to kind of put in those reps. The best ball players, they only get hits like once every 3 up at bats, and that's a great batting average.
Yeah. Yeah, it is helpful to kind of have that mentality of like, I like to write songs, Bob. And so like, if I write something and I know it's bad, it's like, it's just the idea of finishing it and knowing, all right, maybe that gets me a step closer to like a really good one or something. And it kind of eases the discomfort, maybe gives you a little bit of it allows you to keep your mojo, let's say.
Yeah, but all songs start off as seems like nothing. And even the biggest hits grew out of something that doesn't quite seem like there's something there. But that would be your talent. Your talent would be able to recognize that you have something there as a foundation, and there's something there with potential. See, that's the difference between a good artist, a good cartoonist, a good musician is when they stop. They either quit or they stop at a point in which the work is not at its best, and they say, oh, this is great. And they think they have something there when in fact it's just a good starting point. And the potential of the song or the piece of artwork or the cartoon is to say to yourself, what if? What if now I tried this? What if I added a bridge right here and I went into a longer chorus or something like that makes it more distinct and special? And it's all decision making. People ask me, like with my book, oh my God, how did you draw this? You're so talented, whatever. It's a lot of compliments, but it's not so much talent as much as decision making. It was when I know that I have to continue doing the drawing, when I had it right, or when I had it just in the beginning and I had to continue. And it was just a starting point.
That's interesting. Yeah. Decision making. And I would say, well, a big part of your talent is curating, right? Curating from the world, let's say ideas or humor or
well, that's the same thing. That's decision making. Exactly.
You have to figure out what to bring in. Yeah. What is your advice around sort of creative decision making? I know that's difficult to answer because it's an intuitive feeling. I feel like, how do you know when something's done? Well, you just you're like, okay, well, this is done. But I mean, how is it like okay to allow some imperfections in there? Are they welcome? How do you?
Everything that we talked about so far pivots back to this one trait to have that's important to be successful. And it's funny that we're talking about this. I had no idea we were going to talk about this. I think we're about travel, finding the right restrooms, where to get this, where to get that for travel. But I want to say this is very enjoyable because I don't ever talk this deeply about this stuff until I get into the classroom at college. So it's really nice to do this on a podcast. But what I was going to say was, one trait to have with all of this is the ability to surround yourself with people who are talented. And that is my biggest skill, is I have people around me who are very talented. So I have like some of the funniest friends in the world, literally. Like at the risk of being a total name dropper, like I'm friends with somebody from Monty Python, and I know people from SNL, and those people, their judgment, I trust. So I have the sounding board to show them what I'm working on, what do they think, and that dictates what decisions I make. The creative decisions are not just going to be based solely in a vacuum. So if you're writing a song and something, and you just happen to live next door to James Taylor, and you're going to play something for him, and I don't know if he's in Norway, but if it would help to have that support group. And that support group can come in many different ways. You can build a community online in which you have surrounded yourself with people you trust. This is why people join writing groups, and they have different, improv groups. and they have theater groups, because you need that sort of thing to play off each other. Ultimately, it's going to be your decision and judgment to decide on what is good and bad that you're doing. And that's what determines people's star ability. You take different people, they had that gift of knowing for themselves when they were doing their best work. But surrounding yourself with talented people to not just for judgment, but just to also be inspired. Very talented people inspire you, and they also can motivate you in a competitive way as you come in. Like, I have a group of people that get together once a month, and they're like, I would say, the best, funniest cartoonists in the world. There's 4 people. When I go to see them, there's an incentive for me to come in with something good.
Yeah, accountability.
Yes, I don't want to go in there and look foolish. So I'm motivated to do some of my better work.
Hugely powerful. It's a gift to know somebody whose talent and opinion you respect, and to have the type of relationship where you can show them something and they can tell you, this isn't good. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's all part of the process. And I had a friend who's a stand-up comedian, and he was in a club, and there was only like 6 people there. And this happened a couple of months ago, maybe 3 months ago, where he was in this New York City club, and it was empty, just 6 or so people. And on stage came on this guy named Chris Rock.
Yeah, heard of him.
And he was struggling. He was going through material trying to find out what was working and wasn't. He was working on his next special, and he was just throwing out ideas. And my friend said some of the things were working, some of the things were terrible. But that's an example of what we just talked about, is being able to go and find out what works or not, and your creative decision being based on some of the feedback that you can get, whatever means that is. It might mean, if you were making a song, for instance, putting it up in a limited exposure online and seeing what people are saying about it before putting it out there totally, but seeing a little bit of feedback. And you've got to, again, use your judgment to say when people don't know what they're talking about, or when someone gives you some creative, constructive criticism.
That's great. Yeah. And the Chris Rock story you said, that's a great reminder of just like, I mean, maybe less so now because of social media and stuff, but it can be very easy to put people who are accomplished and successful, use air quotes and awards and whatnot, on a pedestal and not understand the big picture that they go through these struggles as well. And, one thing I wanted to add to the idea of surrounding yourself with other successful people, other people's opinions you appreciate and value. Like you mentioned, another unique thing about your projects, I think, and I think this is really cool and exciting. It's getting me excited about some of my ideas, and also maybe for some listeners here is, like this book we're going to talk about in a minute, Footnotes from the Most Fascinating Museums, the Snowman book you talked about before, and you had experts, from all over different universities and places doing research and kind of diving in. And I think it's so cool when you come up with a concept that you're curious about, and the creative energy around your curiosity almost like acts like jet engine fuel for other people. Like then they get excited and they're like, now all of a sudden they're kind of like bitten by the bug of the whole thing, and they want to figure it out, and they're doing it autonomously, right? Like they're out there just kind of like doing this for you, and they're just kind of, I would say they're rallying behind the cause as like this one, where in the Snowman case, like it started with this one question, right? But when you come up with these project ideas where it's like other people from all over just rallying, isn't that a great feeling?
No, it's great. You feel like you're doing something that's making other people happy. There's been a couple of books that I did just for the sake of cheering people up. I wrote a book during the pandemic that was just meant to help people get through it. And sometimes that's all you're doing it for. You're not doing it for anything else but to say you're helping people. I find myself often being picked to say the eulogy at funerals because I feel like people lean on me to say, okay, how could we say something that's going to be lift the room? How can we help lift our spirits? And so that's what we're doing. As artists, we're lifting the spirits around us. And to get more specifically in the nuts and bolts of what you said, I would say that it helps when the idea is something that does feel like it's got some of that fuel that you mentioned, that it has its own power. Not every idea is equally good. You have to understand when you're discarding something. And when, like I said, you're throwing out paper airplanes, some of them don't take off. And you want to abandon ideas that you thought may have been good at the moment, but you realize maybe it doesn't have the staying power of another idea. It's good, though, to make a lot of choices and then to pick the best ideas instead of saying you're going to just stick to one single idea and be stubborn. To get to be willing and flexible to see how one idea could turn into a totally different idea that's really good, that started out as something different, but it kind of evolves into something greater than you imagine. And that's also part of everyone's creative process, is to understand that that happens. Something turns into something totally different. And you had to take that first step and you had to put in the work initially to see why something wasn't quite right or wasn't working, to see why the idea is something that can become something even greater.
Yeah, and I guess you also have to maintain the openness to change and to be able to hear and receive and kind of interpret and intuitively follow the project where it goes, which isn't always an easy task.
No, it's a hard lesson. I know that when I was younger, that was a lesson to learn, was that everything can be improved on. Even if I do something and I sleep on it and I return to it in the morning, before I turn it in, I see how I could have made it a little better. And again, it's asking that question simply of what if? What if I did this now and added a gorilla in the scene? I didn't think of that. Oh, this works better doing it this way. So you're always leaving that possibility of what if.
Well, let's talk a bit about this book.
Oh yeah, I did a book.
Yeah, you did a book. Well, I love to go to museums. Like you. I mean, you go and you get inspired in so many different ways, and it's always unexpected how you're going to walk out. What might inspire you and at any given museum and around any given corner, and that can change based on your, perhaps your mood that day or what you're going through in life. You couldn't possibly go to every museum. I'm looking for the quote here in the introduction, but I think, you said there's over 35,000 museums in the US, 2,000 in Canada, and 1,086 in Mexico. Who knows, could be more now. Yeah, beautiful book. You broke it down by category, like historic homes, the human condition, natural history, and the great outdoors. And what I loved, and I just grabbed this snippet from your press kit where you said, I hope the book gets used as a travel bucket list. So here you go. We're gonna break it down and give you a little travel bucket list here, because there's a lot to choose from. And let's also discuss these beautiful illustrations and paintings. I guess are they all paintings in here? The original paintings, or
these are illustrations which were done digitally because I work traditionally as well on canvas, but for the sake of this project, there were hundreds of illustrations that needed to be done in layers so we could add different languages, because the writing of the text is on top of the paintings. So for the logistics problems, and because there's a lot of things going on here, a lot of moving parts, a lot of museums in a short time of 2 years, only half of the museums are here. And there's only a third of the stories here because we only picked out the best. We had to choose which ones were the best. And that's why the stories are so much fun, is because we had hundreds to choose from and we had so many people. I had so much traveling to do. I had so many museums to go. So you're seeing just the tip of the iceberg, just the best of the best. And to do that, I couldn't have had 150 large canvases. I wouldn't even have a place to put it. I do want to do some of these paintings in large scale. But so anyway, that's the story with that. And that's not so important, because to me, that's background music. It's museums that has center stage here. and the people who tell the story. I'm simply just trying to make them sound their best. I'm giving the sexiest view for the museum, but to me, that's secondary compared to what the content is.
Love it. Okay, so you said this is the best of the best in the book, and now
Yeah.
we're going to get a list of the best of the best of the best.
Yes.
Right here. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I know this is subjective, but we love lists here and they're fun. And I think it's a great way to give people a little bit of insight into what's in the book. So I think you pulled out 9 we're going to hear today.
Did.
Is that right? Okay, cool.
I'm very anxious to dive in. I can't wait.
Let's do it. You want to share your first one?
Yeah, let's do. We have the 9 categories. The first one is the academia and science. And in that category, I'm picking a place in New York City called the Explorers Club. And that's a must pick because that place is a celebration of traveling. It is what it does is it is a collection of everything to do with exploration. And that includes outer space and astronauts to exploring the Arctic poles, deserts, and all these different great adventures. This is sort of the Iron Man of travel. And I've been to this museum more than once. It's just a beautiful place. I've done many paintings of this museum, and there's just so many great little nooks and crannies to discover. One of the stories I have in the book is about their crazy dinners. They would have these really like Fear Factor style dinners for the members in which they would not just eat insects and stuff, but we're going much further. Like they would serve pickled eyeballs and things like that. So that's my first selection for that category. And we're going to move on because
Love it.
Yeah, we did a lot of talking about.
I mean, that's a great way to kick it off because
Yeah.
we're all travelers here. So next time you're in New York, maybe it's not the Statue of Liberty. Maybe it's the Explorers Club. Who knows?
Oh, it's a great place too to just visit because it's such a beautiful space. It's just as a house, it would just be fun. The next category I have in the book is culture. And what I chose for that was where I live. Because it really is special. The Cloisters. The Cloisters is a collection of castles that came over from France that were put together and put on this property that was once owned by Rockefeller. He owned this big estate on the northern tip of Manhattan, and he wanted to put together these castles to create one beautiful medieval castle that houses some of the most important pieces in medieval history, including like the unicorn tapestries, which I wrote my thesis on. And I have a special place in my heart for this place because I helped preserve it based on op-eds that I wrote and action I took. The view that they have from the castle was going to be made into a skyline. They were going to build buildings across the Hudson River in New Jersey. And I blocked the building of these this construction that was going to go on. And they preserved it, so it's a beautiful view. And the plus about the Met Cloisters also is that when you buy a ticket to go to this museum, that museum is also good for the same day to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in Manhattan.
Oh, really?
So you could go in the same day to both museums. And we're not going to mention the Metropolitan Museum of Art in this list, but it goes without saying that's like sort of the Babe Ruth of the lineup. That's a great museum to go to. And if you're anywhere in New York City and going to museums, that's a stop you want to make.
Yeah. I mean, that's a nice travel hack too, what you just shared, to kind of be able to get the tickets and use them at both places. That's
exactly. Now, if you're going to go to New York City, if you have any type of ID that you're a New York State resident, if you have an ID that's a driver's license, of course, but if you have an ID that you taught there or something, use that, and it's much less money for admission to say you're a New York resident. Now, the Cloisters beat out this honorable mention. I have to mention really quick. The other culture museum that I was trying to squeeze in was the Neon Museum in Las Vegas. And if you're ever in Las Vegas, you want to go off the beaten path and go to the Neon Museum because this is the graveyard of old Vegas. they have these enormous old signs and memorabilia from old Vegas that you won't find anymore in Vegas now. Vegas now, Vegas is a place I used to go to every year. I used to go there to relax and to go crazy, and it's changed so much. I stopped going. But if you're going to go to Vegas, you got to go to the Neon Museum.
Bob, what does it mean to go crazy in your world?
For me, going to crazy?
Yeah.
I'm a married man. For me, going crazy means going to the all-you-can-eat buffet. I'm playing the $5 poker tables. That's going crazy.
Love it, man.
Right, and getting to bed by 10 o'clock.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll be right there with you, man. I'm good for 100 at the $5 poker tables, and I'm out. I don't want to lose too much.
Yeah. Even going to, I feel guilty. I grew up as an altar boy at Catholic school. So when I'm poolside and I see all the strippers and dancers come poolside, I collect my things and leave out of guilt. I just can't even stay there. That's me. That's my Vegas. Okay. Next category is encyclopedia, and encyclopedia category, which encompasses museums that have everything, a little of everything. I chose the Art Institute of Chicago, and I'm picking them to encourage people to seek out this painting called The Song of the Lark. This painting is among so many great paintings in the museum, but this particular painting was instrumental in changing Bill Murray's mind. He was going to commit suicide, and he was on his way to killing himself, and he stopped and saw this painting, and he just walked into the museum on his way at a low point in his career, and it kind of harpens back to everything we talked about so far about having self-doubt, having that imposter syndrome, and of course mental health month. And this painting convinced him to move on and to change his outlook. And it's that inspirational. So that's something to look for. And the museum is just a marvelous museum. It beat out my favorite museum. It's a favorite of mine, but I can't pick it because of what I just said about the Chicago Institute. But the Peabody Essence Museum in Salem, Massachusetts is my favorite museum. And one of the things they did was they relocated a Chinese house from an old village and moved it brick by brick to Salem, Massachusetts. And you could see this house along with so many other beautiful items at the Peabody Essence in Massachusetts. It's an amazing museum.
Wow. Lovely. Thanks for sharing those stories too. It really brings it to life.
Yeah, that's just it. My book shows how there's more to the story. There's all these backstories that, people initially think the museums can be dry and very, academic, but it's amazing how these stories add a whole new dimension. Next category I picked is fine arts. And I wanted to recommend in Baltimore, Maryland, the American Visionary Art Museum. And this is great for people who don't really want to go to an art museum. It's the opposite. It is outsider art, and it's the opposite of what we perceive as art. It's this type of art that, like folk art, that will surprise you and make you laugh and make you cry. It redefines what we consider art. And it's got some outside sculptures that are amazing, and it's a must stop if you ever go anywhere near Baltimore.
Love it. All right.
I'm looking through the book, and there's so many other museums I want to mention. Oh my goodness. All right. I have to mention this one really quick. In North Adams, Massachusetts is Mass MoCA. They have one exhibit is a spaceship that crashed on the roof of their museum. You want to check out that? Among other things at that museum. I'm going to move on quickly because I could talk about that museum forever. We're going to skip to historic homes. And the Sleeper McCain House in Gloucester, Massachusetts. This is an amazing house. It's a national landmark. It's a very unknown place, and I'm mentioning it on your podcast because most people have never heard about this. But the Sleeper McCain House is filled with many stories that I don't want to spoil that. You'll read some of them in the book, and you'll hear some of them on the tour that I'm sure you're going to go on now. But it really is this most amazing house that's like sort of like a dream house. It kind of inspired my house where I'm living now, which is in Eastern Pennsylvania. My house has all these secret passages and these secret rooms and things like that throughout the house. And it was partly inspired by my visit to this museum.
Amazing. By the way, I spent a summer living in Hawley, Pennsylvania. I don't think it's that far from where you are.
Hawley is my nearest town. That's where I spend all my time.
Oh yeah,
we
showed up at our rental house, and there was 2 bears on our porch. We're like, wow, now we're really in rural Pennsylvania.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, what are the chances?
When's the last time you've been to Hawley?
Oh gosh, that was, couple decades plus.
Oh, you got to come back. If you come back, I'll take it. We'll go out for a bagel place that opened up. That's fantastic. It's better than the Brooklyn bagels. So
really,
Jason,
I would love that.
Over. Yeah, Jason,
I would love that. Because when I was there, there was pretty much nothing. I mean, we were like on the outskirts of Hawley. We weren't even in Hawley, but we were in that area. And I don't think there was anything. This was, 1990. Now I'm dating myself. 1995.
I think that I think the one thing that would have been there was the Settlers Inn. Was that there?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, the Settlers Inn is like the one big hotel there. And if so, this is a point for travelers. If you're going through Pennsylvania in the corner, the northern corner, you want to check out the Settlers Inn. That's a great place to stay. And it's even part of RCI in the timeshare. So if you're a timeshare person, you could use your timeshare.
Amazing. All right. So we got historic homes. Category. Yeah, we got the Beauport Sleeper McCain House, right? And now Now we're heading to the next category.
This is it. This is really the top 3, in my opinion, maybe. We're coming to the best. But this is for people who are not totally convinced, who might have thought about turning me off and listening to something else. For people who are skeptical about museums, we got something for you. For the human condition, I'm going to break the rules a little bit and go to a museum that's not in that chapter, but in another chapter. But it could have been in the human condition, and that is the Museum of Bad Art. The Museum of Bad Art could have been in the human condition because it's all part of us. And it's in Boston, Massachusetts, and it is the most hideous artwork. And it's funny, and it's delightful, and it's a must-see if you're in Boston. Massachusetts has the most amount of museums of all the United States, so they've come up a couple of times.
I was going to ask about the Museum of Bad Art. So, Bob, what you're saying is there's still a chance I can have a piece of my artwork displayed in a museum somewhere?
Absolutely. I would say this is your only chance of being in a museum.
I would agree. I would agree 100% with that statement.
No offense. My friend, who is, I consider maybe one of the best living cartoonists in the world, Mick Stevens. His story is in the book of how he broke into the Metropolitan Museum of Art and tried to put his work up on the wall. So instead of stealing a piece of artwork, his thing was trying to put up a piece of artwork.
I love it. Well, maybe I'm inspired. So maybe I'll try to make my first ever painting and mail it to the Museum of Bad Art. Just see if I can get, just be like, hey, this is a bucket list item for me. I've always wanted to have my work hung in a museum. This is my only shot. Give it to me. Love it.
Let's make it happen. This is a beautiful moment. This is this will be it. Next category, and we're down to, I think, just a couple, but the next one is natural history and great outdoors. And the 2 that I tried to choose from was Storm King, which is in upstate New York. And I'm wondering if you've been there.
No. Well, upstate New York, yes. I've eaten some garbage plates, but I haven't been to the Storm King.
Oh my. That's sorry to hear. Storm King is this amazing property, hundreds of acres large, and the artwork is spread out among all this land up there and these large sculptures and these installations that are just amazing and transforming the land into a piece of artwork. In one case, there's a piece which is about Vietnam War that creates all these hills, and it's impossible for me to describe verbally. You have to experience it yourself. And that's the museum that lost out to the winner of this category, which is the American Museum of Natural History, which everyone's heard of, but it keeps on evolving into something even greater. It is constantly growing. I think most people have a memory of visiting there as a child. And if you go back there now, your mind will be blown because it's only gotten better. In the case of like one example is you can go now into a center that you're in with thousands of live butterflies. You're in a space. And they've made it very kid friendly. It always was. But to me, when I think of museums and how they impacted me, I think of the American Museum of Natural History. Jason, have you ever been there?
Is it a Smithsonian museum?
No, this is in New York City.
Yes, maybe when I was younger. It's been a while.
Yeah. Well, you have to return. Anyway, the next category is planes, trains, automobiles, and ships. And I want to recommend a museum in Los Angeles called the Peterson Automotive Museum. And they have a collection of James Bond cars and all these other cars. And this is great for people who are just maybe a little tired of art and they want a little something. Well, this collection of cars is just amazing. And it brings back all these memories too, because they have like the Ghostbusters ambulance and they have all these other cars that just going to bring back all these memories. And it's just a beautiful museum, and it really makes you appreciate the whole culture of cars. So
Amazing.
And my favorite museum, I know I picked the Peabody as my favorite museum. I'm changing my vote right now in the category of miscellanea is this museum called the Museum of Jurassic Technology. And this museum, I don't want to say too much about it and spoil the experience, except to say that I've never been the same since I went there. The whole experience is mind-boggling. It is, I can't say much about it because it'll ruin the experience and ruin the surprise. But nobody can go in there and not be surprised. I am not a person who takes drugs, but it was recommended do not go there high because it'd be too much to handle.
Okay. Disclaimer, friendly disclaimer for the listeners out there.
What you get out of this museum, to me, is just hard to put in words except this way. It is the Andy Kaufman of museums.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
That's a great way to describe it. All right. Well, I mean, just with those two statements there, you raised my eyebrows twice. Like I came in, I was not the same person afterwards. The Andy Kaufman of museums, I'm sold. I mean, actually, this whole the best of the best of the best, as we're calling it here, we come up with in this list. Thank you for putting it together. I think that you cannot go wrong if you did a road trip and hit all these. I mean, it sounds like an incredible trip. I should mention the book one more time. We're going to link up to all this, but Footnotes from the Most Fascinating Museums. Just a couple things before I let you go, Bob. I know you're busy and you're getting your day started over there, but what was the actual the road trip, the sort of the travel experience around this for you like? How did you kind of break it up? What did you what was the experience of putting the book together on the travel side?
Well, I just want to mention too that the last museum we mentioned is in Los Angeles for those who are really want to go. The way I worked it was I simply tried to organize it in a way that I would hit museums maybe twice a day. I would try to get to a museum and then move on to the next place. So some of these trips involved a lot of logistics where bed and breakfasts and hotels. Of course, I try to utilize friendships and stay over different people's homes when I could. And there were some cases in which I had to be in more than one place at the same time. And the only way to do that was I actually recruited people to be me and to interview people and to do something for me where I had to be at two places at the same time because there were so many museums to hit. It's impossible. Now, some of the museums actually I had been to before the project, and I knew the museum inside and out. For instance, the cloisters I lived next door to. So I've been living there, and I used the cloisters as my office. I was for years going to the cloisters gardens to do my New Yorker cartoons and use it as my setup. So it was kind of case by case. Some of the museums I had been to just once. For instance, the ones on the West Coast, some of the ones I even mentioned, like the Jurassic Technology Museum was in LA, and I went to the Getty Center. And in all these times, the story would be a little different as how I would get the stories from them. In some cases, I actually sat down with the curator, and the curator would talk to me. In the case of the Broad, which is a beautiful new museum, they actually closed the museum and gave me a private tour with the red carpet treatment. And I got that type of reception from a few museums. Other museums were skeptical and didn't want me to be in their museum or in the book because they were afraid I was going to share a story that would paint them in a poor light. Other museums embraced it. For instance, the curator of the Philadelphia Museum explained the story of a scandal. And you would think that they would be, afraid to share that. But in their case, they had a story in which, as they were opening the museum before letting the public in, they caught an employee from the gift shop having sex with one of the guards on one of the beds that was set up as a period room. And they got in trouble. They got caught. And I'll say the story in about 60 seconds. There's more to the story, but the end of it was that the person got fired because in the employee handbook, it says you're not allowed to touch any of the pieces of artwork, never mind have sex on them.
So, I got fired on a technicality.
Exactly. So every museum was different. Every museum had its own little story of how I got the story from them. In a lot of cases, the museum got into the book because I learned of their community service and the importance to the area. And that would be a factor in choosing which museums I would have to cut and which ones were left in. And to answer a question of why didn't I just include all the museums then that I went to? Well, I'm very conscious of keeping my books affordable. And the publisher and I had to keep the book then to like 145 pages because at full color, it's a very expensive book to make. And so we had to make the tough decision of cutting half the museums. There might be a sequel, but to make the book something that people are actually going to feel comfortable buying in gift shops, we really wanted to keep the book less than $30. It's, I think, $25 in most places. If I included every museum, it would be an expensive book, and then people wouldn't be enjoying the book, and people wouldn't be going to the museums. And the whole point of the book is to really encourage people to go out and find the museums themselves.
Yeah. Love it. Thank you. And going back to what I said before in the press kit, it says right there, I hope the book gets used as a travel bucket list. And so I hope people listening take away some good ideas, maybe in their backyard, maybe for the next road trip. Who knows? Do you want to share where everybody can find your work, or what's the best place? If you want, we're going to link to all this stuff, but if you'd like to.
Thanks.
Yeah.
No, that would be great. I do a newsletter called The Bob, and I think people will enjoy it if they sign up for it. If your listeners hear this and want to sign up, I'll give them a free paid subscription. I'll just upgrade them. If you just email me that you subscribe from this podcast, and you can get my email address from this site, my website, bobeckstein.com, or you can just go to Substack and go to the Bob and get the free subscription and just email me from the newsletter. And the newsletter has cartoons, and it also has some advice for people who are writers and people who are creative and stuff. And I get the advice from some really great writers like Jack Handy and Alan Zibel, and all these great humorists from our generation contribute to the newsletter. So it's really informative. And if it's not your thing to be, a student of writing, it's just there for the cartoons. You could just enjoy it that way too.
Thank you. And that's a generous offer. And I'm going to go sign up for that right after this. And I mean, are you talking about Jack Handy, like inspiring quotes from Jack Handy, the old Saturday Night Live thing? Because I had that book growing up, and it was one of my favorite humor books of all time. It's funny how things come.
Yeah, within in the circle of comedy, he's considered on the Mount Rushmore. Most people consider him our greatest humorist of our generation.
Really? Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
My favorite Jack Handy quote was, "The face of a child couldn't say it all, especially the mouth part of the face."
I had the honor to work with Jack on his last couple of books, and I learned a lot, and it was a real treat.
What's the best advice you've ever received?
There's so much I could say. I mean, and everything I've been learning is from other people. Like, what I repeat is really someone else. I've had the greatest teachers. I've been so lucky. But I'll pick one, and that is try to stay in your own lane when it comes to ego. It's very easy to get discouraged when you see someone like from your high school doing very well, let's say, getting married to Scarlett Johansson and doing the news update for Saturday Night Live, let's say, just as an example. And you think to yourself, why not me? Well, you want to stay in your own lane. You want to compare yourself to no one else but yourself. And it's like, that's a sane way to be. You'll drive yourself crazy if you're constantly comparing yourself and your life to other people. And as you get a little more successful, you're going to meet people who are successful, and there's always going to be someone ahead of you, and it's not a competition. And once you could get past that life is not a competition, but it's about your own growth and stuff, you're going to make yourself much more happy.
Bob, I thank you for taking your time to be on the show here. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think we need to do this again in person at some point, maybe in Hawley, Pennsylvania at that bagel shop.
Come on.
Could be a good spot. No, sincerely appreciate it. And yeah, whenever the next book drops or whatever, you want to come back and have another chat, I would really love that. And I appreciate all the advice and wisdom you shared today. Congrats on the book, and thanks again.
Thanks so much, Jason. This was a lot of fun.
There you have it. Thank you very much to Bob Eckstein for taking his time to be on the show. And I felt so grateful when we were about partway through the conversation there. And he said, I never get an opportunity to chat about these things. I'm really enjoying this podcast. That was the ultimate compliment. And I'm glad that he got to share some of his ideas, and we got to really dig deep for you to pull some of those out and stuff that he doesn't typically share on podcasts. So I hope you got a lot of value out of this one. I certainly had a blast. And of course, the travel list of museums, always fun. This is a great book. I'm holding it right now. Don't forget to check it out. Footnotes from the Most Fascinating Museums. Thanks again to Bob. Now, before I let you go, a quick challenge on museums. I always find it inspiring, as we mentioned in this show, to visit a museum. You never know how the inspiration is going to strike depending on your mood, the day you go, and the things that you kind of come across that just spark different ideas, different thoughts. It's amazing what art can bring out of you from within and what kind of ideas they can spark. And yet, I find, at least for myself, that it's so easy to put off visiting museums that you live near because you're just like, well, A, you're not always in sort of quote unquote travel or tourist mode. and you might even just walk by them and not even pay attention to them. And B, we're just busy, and they're always there. So it seems like, oh, well, I got to get to that museum, or I got to get back to that museum, but I'll get to that. So that's the challenge I'm going to leave you with today, because I thought it would be a fun one to go to a museum that you've been putting off going to, because you might just get inspired. It's easy, it's fun, and it's there. And I know you can go anytime, but why not treat yourself, take yourself on a little date, maybe go on an actual date, maybe go with a friend, family member, whatever, and just visit some kind of museum near you. I am going to do the same. I have not been to the new Monk Museum here in Oslo, so that's the one I'm thinking about. But there's also one called the Paradox Museum, and I think I got to take my kids there. Anyway, there you go. Fun little challenge. One serious note before I let you go, then I'm going to leave you with a funny quote. I know Bob mentioned the story involving Bill Murray. I don't know if that triggered anything for anybody, but if you feel like you need help with anything, do not hesitate to reach out to somebody. There are plenty of places to go if you need some help. So I just wanted to mention that before I let you go. And now I'll leave you with a quote from the great humorist we discussed at the end, Jack Handey. This was a funny one I got from his website. I'm not going to do it justice, but I'll do my best. Okay. I hope if dogs ever take over the world and they choose a king, they don't just go by size, because I bet there are some chihuahuas with some good ideas. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by zerototravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.